Okay, so I decided to this hello RC 160 students. So I decided to try a new thing out. I don't know how well it's going to work or how useful you're going to find it. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read maybe one or two pages from the beginning section of the Incoherence of the Philosophers with you and explain what's going on in the text. I don't know how long it's going to take, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and to give you a sense of how you can read the text and how you can make your way through this admittedly very difficult text. So let me share my screen and let's just begin without overthinking this. All right, so I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully you see what is going on. Let me also go over this. Okay. So we're looking at Ghazali's Incoherence of the Philosophers. By now, you should have read Eric Hornsby's chapter on Ghazali's relationship with philosophy. And you can see that he had a very complex relationship with it. And one of his major philosophical works is this book that he wrote, The Incoherence of the Philosophers. What is important about this book is that, he is kind of a committed, in some senses, Ash'ari theologian. You know, we've talked about Ash'arism and how is a theological school. And the idea is this. Some of the ideas that the philosophers had conflicted with some of the positions that Ash'ari theology took with respect to certain issues. Like, for instance, all the philosophers, most prominently Avicenna, this guy named Avicenna, and Al-Farabi, they believe that the world is co-eternal with God, that God exists, and while the world or the existence or cosmos is subordinate and depends on God's existence to exist, it has always existed along with God, right? So, as God was there was always some kind of world there. Okay. Now this contradicts the Ash'ari and generally the Ash'ari position, the Mu'tazili position, the position of most of the religious theologians of Islam and actually, Christianity and Judaism as well, which is that there was God, there was not the world, then God decides to create the world, at a certain subsequent moment, right? So God created the world in time. This is like, one of the doctrines on which, there is some amount of discrepancy between what the philosophers say and between what the theologians say. And what Al-Ghazali does is he identifies, I think, 20 such positions of discord, of disagreement between philosophy, what the philosophers say, what the theologians say. And he writes a book critiquing those 20 or so positions. And what is kind of important about this work particularly is that he critiques them not only because he thinks that they, conflict with scripture, Quran, or Hadith, or they conflict with, what he regards as orthodox belief, but he wrote this book basically saying, hey, according to the philosophers' own methods of reasoning, according to the positions that the philosophers they themselves uphold, their positions on these 20 issues are actually incoherent or inconsistent with their own methods of analysis, with their own ideas. And that's the reason why it's called an incoherence of the philosophers, not just an external critique of the philosophers. He's giving an internal critique of the philosophers. He's kind of acting like a philosopher, right? And he's saying, hey, based on your own ideas, you're incoherent, right? So that's a little bit of the setup of this book. So let's just get into it. Where I asked you to skip the religious preface because I just didn't want to overburden you with too much reading, and I'm not really sure that the preface adds much substantive information. So there's a religious preface, the author's introduction. So let's go to this 17th discussion. And what I'm going to do is going to be very simple. I'm literally going to read it out loud and just tell you what my thoughts are, my commentary is. So one thing to kind of keep in mind is, or to see is, let me see, mouse, is 17th discussion, has two very basic subtitles. It's on causality and it's on miracles. Now you have already read the basic background and interpretation of this discussion in Ormsby, because Ormsby goes over what is, habit versus causality. He kind of gives you, in a much more readable way, a modern interpretation of what exactly is the 17th discussion about, and what is Ghazali trying to accomplish, and what is the nature of the disagreement between what the philosophers hold and what Ghazali holds, right? So you should already kind of be familiar. You already have the background, you already have the basic ideas of what this disagreement is about, right? So you should do that. If you haven't done that, go do that, then listen to this. Okay, so what exactly are we talking about? All right, so let's just begin. He goes right into it. The connection between what is habitually believed to be a cause and what is habitually believed to be an effect is not necessary according to us. So this us is Ghazali. Ghazali is using kind of the royal we. So basically he is saying, according to me, according to my beliefs, according to the late theological school that I belong to, right? The connection between what is habitually believed to be a cause and what is habitually believed to be an effect is not necessary. Meaning, if you have a cause, right, the effect is not inherent, it's not necessary. There's nothing inherent in the cause that must, without a doubt, produce the effect, right? That's kind of what he's saying. That's his position. He's saying, this is what we believe. This is what I believe, right? And he's saying habitually believed to be a cause and habitually believed to be an effect. He's kind of saying, look, what appears to people as a cause and what appears to people as an effect, there is no necessary connection between the two. So he's already kind of saying, hey, listen, we're really talking about appearances here. We're going to see that. But with any two things where this is not that and that is not this, is very confusing, and where neither the affirmation of the one entails the affirmation of the other, nor the negation of the one entails the negation of the other, it is not a necessity of the existence of the one that the other should exist. And it is not a necessity of the non-existence of the one that the other should not exist. All right. For example, the quenching of thirst and drinking, satiety and eating, burning and contact with fire, light and the appearance of the sun, death and decapitation, healing and the drinking of medicine, the purging of the bowels and the use of a purgative, and so on, to include all that is observable among connected things in medicine, astronomy, arts, and crafts. So he kind of lays out in the first sentence the thesis, he expands, he clarifies and adds more detail as to exactly what he means, right? But with any two things where this is not that, that is not this. What does that mean? It's a fancy way of saying, look, if we have two separate things, right? If we have two separate entities, two separate beings, right? That's what I'm affirming, that there is not a necessary connection between the two if one of them is habitually identified as a cause and one of them is habitually identified as an effect. Where neither the affirmation of the one entails the affirmation of the other, and the negation of the one entails the negation of the other, right? So here he's kind of saying, because he's trying to eliminate one possible miscontrol of what he's trying to assert. Like, say, for instance, you have a coin, one coin, right? Has a heads and tails, right? that one coin, which has two sides, heads and tails, is actually one thing, right? So if I say, if I flick it and I say it's heads, right? You, by necessity, make the conclusion that, oh, there's another side called tails, right? So when you affirm tails, you affirm that it's heads, you negate that it's tails. When you affirm that it's tails, you negate that it's heads, right? But he's talking that's just one single object. He's saying, look, those, sure, you can talk about necessity of affirmation or negation in that circumstance. But when you have two different objects, like you have my finger and you have a coin, and I fling the coin, and the coin spins on the table, we have two different objects. And he's going to say, hey, man, there is no necessary connection between my flinging and it spinning on the table. Right? For two objects, no. One object, perhaps. Two objects, no. Right? So, and then he gives you a bunch of examples. Right? If you drink water, the necessary effect of that is not going to be quenching of thirst. If you eat, the necessary effect of that is not going to be very satisfying. If you have a fire and you put something close to it, it's not necessarily going to be the case that it's going to have to burn. If the sun appears, it is not a necessary effect that the light comes out. He is denying that there is a necessary connection between these two entities. There is a necessary causal relationship. Right? So, okay, that's what he's denying. Now he's kind of talk about, okay, let's move on. Their connection is due to the prior decree of God who creates them side by side, not to its being necessary in itself, incapable of separation. So this is the doctrine that he is connected to. He is affirming. The doctrine that he is defending is, hey, listen, when the sun appears, that's God's creation number one. Simultaneously, God creates as its effect the light coming out from the sun. It's not because there's some kind of inherent natural quality that the sun has as the sun, that without God's action and God's agency, the light is going to just emerge from the sun. He's saying, no, everything, all events that we perceive that are observable in the universe are somehow or another dependent on God's will to create them, including cause and effect. On the contrary, it is within divine power to create satiety without eating, to create death without decapitation, to continue life after decapitation, and so on, with all connected things. In fact, God can create, you giving you the feeling of being full. That's what satiety means, without you having ever eaten. God can kill you without their decapitation. God can keep you alive with decapitation, right? There is nothing inherent or necessary about the connection between these two things that we often habitually observe in the outside world, that must make it so that it must be the case that when there's a cause, there must be an effect. No. Well, cause and effect, God creates simultaneously next to each other in time. And what is the explanation for why they exist is because God decided to create them in that way. Right? Okay. So that's what he's trying to talk about. To examine these matters that are beyond enumeration will take a long time. Let us then take a specific example, namely the burning of cotton, for instance, when in contact with fire. All right, so here he's just saying, look, if we were to approach this issue on an example by example basis, there's so many different examples of things that habitually occur as cause and effect, right? To like, it would just, This wouldn't be an 11-page discussion. It would be like thousands of page discussion. So what he's going to do is just use one example. And that example is cotton, contact with fire. Probably what's important about the idea is cotton is highly flammable, right? It's highly flammable, and habitually you're going to notice if you put a flame next to cotton, it's going to burn, right? He's denying that it must be the case that the world is built in such a way that it must burn. It is necessary that it burns. So he's denying it, right? All right, for we allow the possibility of the occurrence of the contact without the burn. And we allow, as possible, the occurrence of the cotton's transformation into burnt ashes without contact with the fire. The philosophers, however, deny the possibility of this. They deny the possibility of this, right? He is saying it is possible. Maybe not, doesn't happen often, but it is not impossible. It is not something that is unthinkable that you can have a piece of cotton come in contact with fire and it not burn. Or that the cotton turn into ashes without it being cotton. It's not inconceivable. It is not beyond the realm of what can be thought of, realistic thought of. It is possible. But the philosophers know. Philosophers know. They have a very different idea of the way the world works. The discussion of this question involves three positions. All right, so this is three positions, right? The first position is for the opponent to claim that the agent of the burning is the fire alone, it being an agent by nature and not by choice, hence incapable of refraining from acting according to what is in its nature after contacting a substratum receptive of it. And this is one of the things we deny. On the contrary, we say. All right, so he's saying the first position is for the opponent to claim. Here he is introducing in the opponent, meaning the person who is against Ghazali's position, right? What is their position? What are they saying? Well, what they're saying is the agent of the burning is a fire alone. So burning happens, you have a fire, you have a piece of cotton, right? What is the cause of that burning? I mean, to be more precise, what is the efficient cause of that burning? The cause of that burning is the fire, right? Specifically, some kind of power, some kind of capacity, some kind of quality in the fire, such that when it comes into contact with a substratum, some kind of material that is receptive to burning, right? If that happens, you are going to get burned. That's what he's saying. So by saying that contacting a substratum receptive to it, he's talking about like cotton that is highly flammable. But presumably we can all imagine that, yeah, fire can come into contact with things that are not going to burn. Like for instance, ceramic. Let's say if I have a match and I put ceramic over it, it's not going to spontaneously catch on fire, right? Because ceramic's substratum, the matter that it is composed of, is not receptive to burning when coming into contact with fire, right? So what the philosophers hold is, look, if you have fire and you have something that is flammable by its very nature, gasoline, you add that fire to the gasoline, it is necessary that it will catch on fire. It is impossible that it not catch on fire. And this is one of the things we deny. On the contrary, we say the one who enacts the burning by creating blackness in the cotton, causing separation in its parts, and making it cinder or ashes is God, either through the mediation of his angels or without mediation. So God is the true agent. The true agent is not the fire and the nature of the fire. The true agent is God, either God through the mediation of his angels or through without mediation. As for fire, which is inanimate, it has no action. For what proof is there that it is the agent? Like, what's your proof, bro? Philosophers, why? Why do you say that? They have no proof other than observing the occurrence of the burning at the juncture of contact with the fire. Observation, however, only shows that the occurrence of burning at the time of the contact with the fire shows the occurrence of burning at the time of the contact with the fire. But it does not show the occurrence of burning by the fire and the fact that there is no other cause for it. So he is saying, look, let's be strictly simple about what exactly is it that we see when we see flammable cotton coming into contact with a fire. What we see are two different events. We see the fire, and we see the contact, and then we see the thing that is burning, the cotton turning into ashes and burning. Right? We don't actually, those are two things that we see that occur simultaneously. And then we add the judgment of causality. We infer causality, but we don't actually see causality. We don't see causality, right? And we don't, and therefore, because we don't see causality, causality is not something that we see, something we infer, something we hypothesize, something that we guess. It is open for debate and discussion. And it's also possible that there might be other agents, for instance, God, who is actually the cause of the burning up of the planet. Right. For there is no disagreement with the philosophers that the infusion of spirit and of the apprehending and motive powers into the animal sperm is not engendered by the natures confined in heat, cold, moistness, and dryness. Okay, so here he's kind of bringing up an example that you're not really going to understand. And that is an example of what the philosophers already themselves believe. And they had this entire very big philosophy about the nature of these four different natures, the nature of heat, cold, moist, and dryness. In fact, many of like the medicine, the science of medicine in this time period often relied on the different mixtures of these four core elements to explain why do people get sick and whatnot, right? And what he is saying is that, hey, listen, in medical science, you often rely on these four elements to give causal explanations of why a person is sick, but simultaneously, in the specific case of an embryo, right, developing the ability to perceive and the ability to move, right? That is not the result of these four natures. You guys yourself say that, even though in your medical textbooks you often use these four elements, heat, cold, moistness, dryness, as causal explanation. So already, you yourself are very discriminating about what you identify as a cause and what you identify as an effect, right? That the father does not produce his son by placing the sperm in the womb, right? That he does not produce his life, sight, hearing, and the rest of powers in, right? It is known that these come to exist with the placing of the sperm, but no one says that they come to exist by it or because of it. Rather, they exist from the direction of the first, either directly through the mediation of the angels entrusted with temporal things. That is what the philosophers who uphold the existence of the Creator uphold in a conclusive manner. Our discourse being at this point in agreement with them. Right? This goes back to a theory of some philosophers who held that God, that a lot of the things that happen and come into being in the sublunar terrestrial world are the result of this what they call the first. So he's already saying, look, you're already admitting, the mediation of these other beings. So it's kind of talking about that. It has thus become clear that something's existence with a thing does not prove that exists by that thing. Indeed, we will show this by an example, right? if a person blind from birth who has film on his eyes and who has never heard from people the difference between night and day. So here he's giving you a hypothetical example. I'm going to prove to you that two things can coexist, co-occur. They coexist and co-occur only, and that because they co-occur, it doesn't necessarily must be the case that their co-occurrence is indicative of a causal relationship, right? They can exist with each other. One of them does not necessarily exist because of the other or by it. So he's saying, yo, do this hypothetical experiment. Imagine you have a person blind from birth, got some kind of covering on his eyes, and he has no idea, no conception of night and day difference. I've never heard anyone talk about it, right? And let's say it's daytime, and he removes the film covering his eyes, right? Then he opens his eyelids and he sees colors. Such a person would believe that the agent causing the apprehension of the forms of the colors in his eyes is the opening of his sight. That as long as the sight is sound, his eyes open, the film removed, and the individual in front of him having color, it follows that he would see it. It being incomprehensible that he did not see. So here he's saying, look, it is not perfectly natural, though mistaken ultimately, for the person to think it's this removal of this impediment and my opening my eyes that is the cause of me perceiving the world and the colors in the world. Like the cause is, right, opening the eyelids and removing of this film. When, however, the sun sets, and so here we have co-occurrence, and we have a judgment that one is the cause of the other. Opening of the eyelids is the cause of the seeing of the colors, right, during the daytime. So presumably that is the cause, but then something else happens that shows actually not the cause. When, however, the sun sets and the atmosphere becomes dark, he would then know that it is sunlight that is the cause for the imprinting of colors in the sun. When the sun sets, light is gone, colors are gone, can't see anymore, right? So, you realize I was actually mistaken about the true nature of the cause. So he is saying things can co-occur, and human judgments can be mistaken about the nature of the co-occurrence. That actually they just co-occurred, they co-occurred with each other, and it is our mind that adds the judgment that one caused the other, and oftentimes that mind is wrong, right? So if you accept that the mind is wrong in this case, why can't you accept the mind is also projecting a hypothesis that there's something inherent in the nature of fire, the nature of flammable cotton, such that they come into contact. One is the cause of the burning of the other. Why can't that be mistaken as well? Right? So I think that is kind of like the way that this proceeds. So I hope I've given you some way of making your way through this. Now, there's going to be a lot of ideas in here that you're not going to understand. Like, for instance, this first. What is this first? What is the bestower? You're going to come across this term, bestower of forms. So I don't necessarily, my expectation is not for you to be able to pick up on those details and the intricacies of how that argument works, but I want you to get a sense of what's the general structure of the argument. When is Ghazali talking, giving his opponent voice? When is he criticizing? How does he criticize? What are the examples that he uses to criticize? And what ultimately is, his own position and what is his analysis about? So I hope that this helps.